Well, friends, I've created and run this group of makers and inventors, and I host our activities on meetup.com, if you've ever heard of that. It's called The People Who Really Build Things, and we're a little over 700 members over there. And the first Saturday of every month, I host a maker hangout and show and tell. And we have people bring the most interesting things that they're working on. One guy's a clockmaker. We have a lot of costumers in the group. But last month, a guy brought something I found really interesting, boomerangs. So I took a deep dive on the Boomerang YouTube channels, and we're going to build one ourselves today. We'll start out with this hunk of birch from a downed tree. It fell several years ago. I think this should work just fine. Now I want to make a hunting boomerang, which is made to throw in a straight line. One of the features of a hunting boomerang is the handle you throw with is quite a bit longer than the forward wing. I think the shape of this log should do just fine for that purpose. So we'll take it over to the bandsaw and resaw some slices out of it. So I've drawn some guidelines on here, we'll just cut those out. Now you need to be careful when you're cutting a piece that doesn't sit flat on the bandsaw table, because it can twist the blade. Now one thing I know is you have right-handed boomerangs and left-handed boomerangs. So I'm right-handed, so I'll be making nothing but right-handed boomerangs. Now that we have our thin planks, we'll rough in the shape of the boomerang. And bear in mind, I cannot tell you the right way to do any of this because this is the first time I've ever done it. And a lot of the guys that I learned from on YouTube, it was the first time they had ever done it as well. Okay, those proportions look pretty similar to the ones that I saw on YouTube. So we'll go ahead and cut all those out. Now a good bandsaw really makes quick work of these kind of cutouts. But something I just learned from David Picciuto, and I'll leave a card to his channel up in the corner, is having a smaller bandsaw set up with a thin blade, 4 curves, is really handy. After the bandsaw, we'll get it over on the belt sander and flatten it out and make it smooth. That is some good looking wood. This is going to be nice. So anyway, boomerangs are either left-handed or right-handed. And something common to all of them is the bottom is flat. So I'm right-handed, so this entire bottom here is flat, but as it rotates, the leading edge has to be rounded and sloped down like an airplane wing. But then as it rotates around, this is the leading edge. So you've got the leading edge here and the leading edge there. And I'm going to sand this into that shape now on the belt sander. So after about 5 minutes, the wings started to take shape. But then in retrospect, I'm thinking this flat-backed belt sander might not be the best approach. Because here I am trying to make a curved surface using a flat belt. Maybe something without a hard back on it might be better for making a curved surface. Okay, now you see, this is the leading edge. It needs to be thicker and curved down. What happens is that as air passes over this curved part, it creates a low pressure area above the wing, and that causes it to lift. So then we flip it around and, oops, this is why I made 4 of these. I cut it the wrong way. So this one is trash. Maybe I could save it, I don't know. So I spent about 20 minutes sanding on the next one, and now let's take it out and go fly it and see how it works. Okay, so you see here we've got the leading edge. This looks just like an airplane wing. And then we twist it around, and now we have another leading edge, and it's also just like an airplane wing. And this looks an awful lot like that hunting boomerang that I patterned it off of. I'm thinking we should go try to fly it. Just as I don't know anything about making a boomerang, I don't know anything about throwing one either, so this is my very first try. Now this is supposed to be a hunting boomerang, but I think I'm going to try throwing it like a return boomerang. Well, that wasn't a bad flight. Well, it's flying about 50 meters on the toss. That's not bad. Here's my first one. You can see it's kind of thick, It's got a little more pronounced curve. I came in and did another one that's not quite so thick. So a little bit thinner wing, a little bit more relaxed on the curve, a little bit longer on the front. This one actually flies quite a bit better. Now I threw this from all the way over there, which is a good 100 meters. So there are my first two attempts at making a hunting style boomerang. I'm definitely going to keep my eyes open for some elbow-shaped tree limbs that are pretty well seasoned. I'm thinking firewood's probably going to be a good source for that. So I'm not really feeling so great about the performance of that boomerang, and I think I want to build another. But I don't really have any more suitable wood. So I think what I'm going to do is make some micarta. And all that is a bunch of layers of cloth stacked up and bound together with epoxy. And what you need for micarta is you need a mold. So we'll make that out of these 2x3s. So we'll just screw those 2x3s together and then screw them down to that plywood backing. Alright, so here's our mold, and I should probably put masking tape around all the joints so the epoxy doesn't leak out. Then these are the pieces that we're going to use to compress the cloth inside the mold. You'll notice they don't really fit that tightly. You really don't want them to, because you want the excess epoxy, the epoxy squeeze out, to have a place to go, and that is ideally around the edges. So now we'll seal it up. Okay, now the epoxy shouldn't leak out around that. Now I was thinking of using this fireproof cloth, but the weave on it is so tight I don't think that the epoxy is going to sink in very well. Now I don't think it matters much what you use, because the strength actually comes from the epoxy. Fact of the matter is you could probably just use paper towels and it'd be just as strong. But let's give it a little bit of color, and we'll use these old bath towels that I use as shop rags. Now we'll just peel that stack out of there. I really like the way the color's laid in, so I'm just going to lay it this way, and we'll pour some epoxy in, lay some strips in, pour more epoxy, lay more strips. And this is pretty messy, so make sure to wear gloves. I like these plastic measuring cups from the $1.25 store, and these silicone spatulas and brushes. Those come in handy. I'm just going to mix up a 3-cup batch, which is 1.5 cups of each. Now I will tell you that the kind of epoxy I'm using is tabletop epoxy, meant to cover the top of like bars and stuff. But I don't think the brand much matters. I mean, yeah, there are some epoxies that are out there that are better than others. Some that have a really good name come from Jamestown Distributors, if you know who they are. Not sponsored. They're a bunch of good folks over there, though. Okay, and that looks like a pretty good mix. And we'll go ahead and lay a base coat down in there. Then come in with our first layer. I want to make sure that base coat flows out all the way to the edges. Then we'll come in with another layer. Okay, and yeah, you want to get that all nice and wet with the epoxy. Then come in with the next layer. And in case you're wondering, this mold is one-time use. We're going to have to destroy it to get the micarta out of it. It's going to be one colorful boomerang, that's for sure. Okay, now we'll put our compression pieces in. Then we'll start adding the clamps. Now you can see that epoxy oozing out, so there was plenty in there to completely embed all that cloth. Now we'll come back around lunchtime tomorrow and break that micarta out of the mold and make another boomerang. So the next day, the dried epoxy just pulls right out, and that's as good as new. So I tilted this up like this to let the squeeze out run away because big pools of epoxy take longer to cure. Let's unwrap this and see how it goes. I know I'm going to have to break my clamps free because they got glued to the wood. Okay, so this is totally stuck together, and the only way this is coming apart is at the bandsaw. So we'll remove all the screws and then cut all the wood away. We'll take it down to the outline shape first, then trim the top and bottom off, leaving mostly nothing but the micarta underneath. Then we'll take it back to the bench and draw a more well-defined boomerang shape onto it and cut that out as well. From there, it's on to the belt sander to add definition and shape the wings. During this process, I decided the micarta was too thick, so I sliced it down the middle, and that gave me 2 blanks to work with. All right, well, that's a pretty good shape. It's a little bit flexy, but let's go fly it and see what happens. Well, that was underwhelming. One thing about it is it's pretty flexy, and the texture of the micarta is pretty rough, but I know something that will improve both situations. We'll coat this thing in epoxy. Maybe it'll fly better then. I know one thing, it'll make it look a lot better. Now, I'll mix up some more. I've got a piece of plywood with 3 screws in it. We'll do the bottom first, set it on top of there, do the top. Yeah, watch that color pop when we apply this. And we'll just apply a generous coat of epoxy. Now we'll let that cure and try to fly it again, see how that works. Okay, it's the next day and this thing is totally rigid now. It still has something of a texture to it, and the epoxy did leave a couple of drips down there, but it looks good. Let's go fly it. Okay, so this is not flying the best. I think what we'll do is we'll go sand off this texture a little bit, and a friend of mine said undercutting the bottom instead of having it flat might be a little bit of a help as well. So I went over to the 1x32 inch belt sander, which does not have a solid backing, and I took off a lot of that texture, and it's a lot smoother now. But I still think I want to undercut this bottom edge as my friend suggested, and we'll do that with just a flat disc. Okay, so I hollowed out the underside like my friend had suggested. Let's go fly it again. Well, that was pretty anticlimactic. I think I'm going to have to get a book on the subject, figure out what I'm doing wrong. If any of you folks have ideas about how to make this thing fly better, please leave comments in the doobly-doo and we'll talk about it. Anyway, that's all for this time. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Click up here to see my last video. Click over here to see something of mine that YouTube thinks you'll like. And have a good one.